Good luck. Dylan, I can't see that shit. Stop.
May I have your attention, please? Welcome to the Dr. Martin Luther King Convocation. It's an annual convocation sponsored here by Lewis and Clark High School. Would you please stand, and gentlemen, would you please remove your hats as our choir, the Lewis and Clark High School Choir, under the supervision of Miss Kathleen Blair, sing our national anthem. High School Choir. And now, ladies and gentlemen, if you would be so, please tighten up so everybody can get a seat. Just move a little closer to your neighbor and make room for more neighbors. Thank you very much. And now we will begin the Martin Luther King Convocation. Good morning or evening, friends. You're listening to LCHS, the Lewis and Clark High School Show. I'm your host, your friendly announcer, enlightening you about a man some call the Dreamer, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and his message of love. We are here to celebrate the birth of Dr. Martin Luther King, born January 15th, 1929. A national holiday named in his honor. He was a very bright and smart child who soaked up knowledge like a sponge. The message of love is one the young Martin Luther grew up with because his parents instilled it in him from birth. His mother was a teacher. His father was a preacher and the pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church. Education was certainly a priority for the King family. Martin Luther King Jr. graduated from high school at the tender young age of 14 and graduated from Morehouse College at the age most students graduate from high school. Martin Luther King's most noted hero was Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi led a nonviolent protest against the controlling and oppressive forces of the occupying British government in India. Gandhi's nonviolent protest eventually led to the liberation of India from the British. Throughout the history of the people of African descent, the drum was an instrument used to carry a message. A drum major is a leader of a drum corps or band. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was called a drum major for justice. He stated once in his speech, "Yes, if you want to say that I was a drum major, say that I was a drum major for justice. Yes, say that I was a drum major for peace. Yes, I was a drum major for righteousness, and all the other shallow things will not matter. I won't have any money to leave behind. I won't have the fine and luxurious things of life to leave behind. But I just want to leave a committed life behind. That was Dr. Martin Luther King. The Civil Rights Movement was an equal rights movement. Not only were African Americans segregated, but Native Americans were too. They were not allowed to exercise their beliefs and perform their dances anywhere but on their reservations. But the movement under King's leadership enabled them to exercise their rights, to express their cultural beliefs, perform their dances in public places as well. And that is why we can enjoy the powwows we have here in Spokane. Now, to do so today, we have a Native American cultural dance by Lewis and Clark High School's own Miss Khadija Redmond.
The Island Cream Contest.
Yeah.
Stony Park High School Student Body Step Team. The message of justice, peace, righteousness, and love are the messages Dr. King delivered during the Birmingham bus boycott, which landed the civil rights leader in jail. Dr. King delivered the message of love in the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. In Memphis, Tennessee, his message of love was in the forefront of the sanitation workers' strike for fair wages for an honest day's work. King's nonviolent march in Memphis with the theme, "I am a man," was to say that a man should be able to work and take care of his family. $1.50 an hour was not enough for a man to take care of his family. Dr. King had a lovely family. His wife, Coretta, daughters Yolanda and Bernice, and sons Martin III and Dexter. Not pictured is Bernice. He understood how important family and love was. We have breaking news. This just in. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. shot to death, gunned down in Memphis, Tennessee. Dr. King gave his philosophy of love in his description of how he wanted to be remembered and eulogized. He once said, "I'd like somebody to mention that day that Martin Luther King Jr. tried to give his life serving others. I'd like for somebody to say that day that Martin Luther King Jr. tried to love somebody. I want you to be able to say that day that I tried to feed the hungry. And I want you to be able to say that day that I tried in my life to clothe those who were naked. I want you to say that I tried to love and serve humanity." Dr. Martin Luther King. I'm your friendly announcer. special guest for today. Erin Jones is here today to share her personal story and how her family had to deal with the issues of race and social justice. Erin Jones has been involved with education for the past 16 years as a volunteer, a private and public school teacher, a late-night director, and an instructional coach. Erin speaks 4 languages and was raised in the Netherlands, which gives her the ability to relate to a variety of audiences. Erin received state recognition as the most innovative foreign language teacher in 2006, and then national recognition as the Milken Educator for Washington State in 2007. Her particular passion is working with students in urban communities. Erin was hired in 2008 as the director for the Center for the Improvement of Student Learning, where her focus was on creating a repository for best practices and building bridges between schools, families, and communities. She also participated in Washington's 2008 Achievement Gap Studies. Erin has recently been promoted to Assistant Superintendent of Student Achievement at the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together and welcome Ms. Erin Jones.
Sing grace, pass me the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. Now, how many of you have heard that song before? It is the most famous song in the world, that song. It is sung in almost every English-speaking country across the globe. As I thought about coming here today, it really came to my mind as the heart of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The reality of Amazing Grace, that song, and I'm not a singer, my son is actually a singer. I'm a 16-year-old who will be trying out for American Idol next year. So I'm not the singer in the family. I love to sing, but my son is the singer. But as I thought about that song, I went back to history. Everyone knows the song, but almost no one knows the history of that song. Let's go back to the 1700s. A young man was born in 1720 named John Stanton. He was an Englishman, and as a young man, he decided to get a career in sailing. And so he began to sail on the slave ships in the early 1700s. Ships that were packed solid with Africans from all across Africa. And he sailed across. I'm not really thinking twice about it at the time. When the slave ships were packed with Africans, the Englishmen didn't see them as human. They saw them as chattel, as objects to be sold. And that was the same story for John Stanton. And then one day he had this revelation. He went from blindness to sight. He suddenly realized that these were real human beings in the bottom of the ship, with faces and names and stories. And it absolutely broke his heart. And he left that career and decided to become a minister. And he wrote this song about grace, which means undeserved favor. He was the man who didn't deserve favor. He recognized that he had been inhumane to this huge group of thousands of people. Now, what's another interesting fact about this song is the melody that goes along with the lyrics was actually sung by the slaves in the slave ship. Now, if you've ever played piano before, there are the black keys and the white keys. And some of you may have heard this story before. A lot of African melodies and even African American melodies are played on the black keys, ironically. And so if you look at Amazing Grace, the original melody was written in the Black Keys. And it's believed that this was a melody that was sung by the slaves in the bottom of the ship. Now, if you know anything about history, about slavery, about the slave trade, they would often place slaves next to other slaves from different regions so that they couldn't communicate to one another. So they couldn't speak to one another, but they could sing. And John Stanton was absolutely blown away by the melody that these people would sing, even in the midst of great trial and tribulation. And so we wrote this song in honor of them. Now, the reason I think this is so appropriate for Dr. Martin Luther King is he was a man that was born at a time just past slavery. So slavery had ended, but segregation was still reality for him. I'm sure that he experienced racism on a regular basis. He experienced schools that were segregated. He experienced textbooks that were probably 20, 30 years out of date, buildings that were falling apart. And that yet this young man chose to take every opportunity to make himself better. And as you heard before, he graduated from high school at 14 years old. He had 2 doctorate degrees by the time he was 25 years old. Here's a young man who had all the odds against him, who could have been angry, he could have fought back, and he chose instead to demonstrate grace, undeserved favor to the people around him. And so he linked arms with black people and white people, Native Americans, Asians, and he said, instead of us fighting back with swords and guns and spears, instead of being violent, let's instead show undeserved favor. Let's believe that just like John Stanton, that these people can go from blindness to sight. And so he laid down his life for that cause. Now look at my own life. Martin Luther King became my hero when I was 14 years old. I remember the day I first heard about Martin Luther King. Now, as you heard before, I was raised in the Netherlands. We didn't have Martin Luther King Day every year. So the first time I ever heard of Dr. King was when I was 14 years old. There was an American that had come to my school, and she talked about this man, this black man. He was the first black man that I'd ever seen who had any power. I grew up in a country where there are very few black people. I was actually adopted by a white couple here in the United States. I was orphaned at birth, put in an orphanage right away in Minnesota. And 95% of black children in Minnesota don't ever get adopted. They stay in the foster care system. And so that should have been my story if you looked at data. But there were 2 white people, a couple who actually could have children but chose not to. They chose their offering to this country was to adopt 2 black children, and so they adopted my brother and I out of the orphanage. And they said, we want to give these 2 children a different opportunity at life. And what happened is my grandparents actually shunned my parents. They kicked them out of the house. My parents were forced to move to another city away from their community because we were darkies. Nobody wants a darkie. It was either darkie or the N-word. Those were the only 2 words that people had for us back then in 1971. And so my parents chose to raise us in a little town in southern Minnesota. They had enough of people's comments and their stares that by the time I was 5 years old, my father decided to take his teaching degree and move to the Netherlands. So he came home one day and announced to my brother and I, he was 3, I was 5, we're moving to the Netherlands. Now I don't know how many of you at 5 years old had heard of the Netherlands, but I was like, the Netherlands? And so we moved to this country where my father explained to us, what is the Netherlands, where is it? Well, it's 15 hours away and across an ocean, and by the way, it's below sea level. Now I'm a little kid. Below sea level, to me, sounds a little terrifying. And my father explained to me that there's this wall that goes around the entire country and holds back the ocean. And you're taking me to this place? And when you're 5, you don't get to make decisions. And so my brother and I got on this plane, and 15 hours later, we were in a country where it sounded like they were clearing their throats constantly. Now, if you've ever heard German, Dutch is like German clearing your throat. That's the language. But you know what? You just move to a country and you begin to speak the language. And so I was fluent in Dutch by the time I was 6 years old. But something really amazing happened. Because my father taught at the American School of The Hague, my brother and I were able to get an education at one of the best private schools in the world for free. Today, that school costs $24,000 a year for kindergarten. And yet, my brother and I had the opportunity to go to school there for free. Now, you're probably asking yourself, what do you get for $24,000? Well, I'll give you a couple examples. In 7th grade, we studied castles and kings and queens and knights and went and lived in a castle in south of France for a week as a 7th grade class. As an 8th grade class, we studied Shakespeare for a year, and then got on a plane and flew to London, drove to Stratford-on-Avon, where Shakespeare's actually from, visited his home, and then saw 2 plays at the Globe Theatre, which is where Shakespeare originally performed his plays. As a triple varsity athlete in high school, we played 1 game at home, 1 weekend home, and another weekend away. And so I played in 12 countries. As an athlete, I have visited the Parthenon in Athens, Greece. I visited the Eiffel Tower in Paris. Seen Cats and Les Miserables in London. As an athlete, that was part of school for me. But something happened when I was 15 years old. My father brought me back to America. He said, "Erin, you need to see America. You need to understand where you came from. You need to know your roots." And so my father and I came back to America to spend a week in Washington, D.C. with another high school from the United States. And I got off the plane in Washington, D.C., and if you've ever been to D.C., you know what I'm about to say. I imagine Washington, D.C., our capital, white president, White House, white people. Now, if you've ever been to D.C., you understand. I was about to have the shock of my life because I got on that plane and looked out at a sea of faces who looked just like me. It's the first time I'd ever seen anyone black, besides my little brother who doesn't count. And so I'm standing there, 6 feet tall with this 2-foot-long afro. I always felt like a freak, looking out at a sea of people who had hair just like mine, skin just like mine, and I felt like I was home for the very first time in my life. I hadn't realized that I was alone until that moment. Now, it turned out, ironically, that the American school we were supposed to spend the week with was an all-black school from South Carolina. And so I got to a hotel and came to find out that my roommates were 2 black girls from South Carolina. And I remember I was so excited to see black people for the first time. I walked into my room. "Hi, my name's Erin Adamson, and I'm from The Hague, the Netherlands." And these 2 girls looked at me like I had just gotten out of the spaceship. And they just stared at me and they started talking to each other, like really fast, in South Carolina. Now, I spoke English, Dutch, French, Spanish at the time. I did not speak South Carolina. I had no idea. These girls looked like me, but they did not sound like me. And I'm watching them and trying to read their lips, and I cannot understand a word they're saying. But you know what they decided in that little mini conversation? We are going to turn this girl into a black girl. So they made me their project for the week. And so I found myself, I had this big 2-foot afro, I found my head on the ironing board, and they were ironing my hair out. And I looked in the mirror 8 hours later, and for the first time in my life, I was 15 years old, for the first time in my life, I felt pretty. First time in my life. Remember crying, looking in that mirror, feeling like for the first time I looked like some of the other girls in my school. That week would transform me. But unfortunately, that week came to an end, and I had to fly back to my home, back in the Netherlands, and be the only black kid in my school again. And it was heartbreaking for me, but I knew in that moment I had to come back to America for college. And so I worked really hard. I was, again, a triple varsity athlete, MVP of Europe in all 3 sports. Was going to try to get a D1 scholarship back here in America, but found out that I'd have to fly in a plane to try out with the team. And my parents said, "We don't have that kind of money. You're going to have to get good enough grades to get an academic scholarship." And so I worked really, really hard. Graduated with a 3.9 GPA, second in my class. Got a scholarship to Princeton University for a whopping $1,000. Yeah. Mom and Dad said, "Maybe that'll pay for books, but that's about it, honey, sorry." And then the sister school to Princeton, Bryn Mawr College said, "We will pay for 75% of your tuition." And Mom and Dad said, "Yes, where you're going, honey." Here's what I will tell you, all those of you that are juniors and seniors, do not attend a college you have not visited. I made that mistake. I didn't have a choice. I had to go where Mom and Dad said to go, but I had never visited there. And all I knew was Bill Cosby lived in Philadelphia, and the college was in Philadelphia. So in my mind, I was going to Cosby Land. And I was really excited about this, because I really wanted to be Mrs. Huxtable. I had my hair like cards ready. Well, I got off that plane at 18 years old, and took a taxi cab out to the college. My mother fell asleep eventually, and we get out to the town, and it says Bryn Mawr Town, population 4,000. Next sign, Bryn Mawr Golf Course, no coloreds or Jews allowed. And I remember seeing that sign and doing some math in my head and running through the facts that I knew: slavery, segregation, civil rights movement, Bill Cosby. How come I can't be at this golf course? And I knew there's a problem here. Red lights are flashing in my head, and my white mother sleeping next to me. And I have to decide in that moment, do I tell my white mother? Do I wake her up? No, because I've worked 4 years to get to America. I'm not going home tonight. And so I didn't tell my mother. But that sign spoke volumes about what that community thought about me. My first year of college, I can't tell you how many times people told me, you're only here because you're black. Don't think you're smart. You're only here because you're black. Because there are a ton of you on campus, and you're one of the 10. It didn't matter that I had a 3.9 GPA. It didn't matter that I spoke 4 languages. It didn't matter that I was a star athlete. By the end of 1 year, hearing that over and over, I began to think that I deserved to just clean toilets and clean kitchens like the other black people I saw around me. I was broken down. It only took a year. But something happened to me this summer after my freshman year. I discovered Dr. J and the basketball court that he had built about 2 miles off campus, where a bunch of the black servants would play at lunchtime. And I began to play basketball in the streets of Philadelphia, and I still ball, by the way. I may be 40, but I'm still a baller. But anyway, I began to play in the streets of Philadelphia, and I would play in the off season. I played soccer and basketball in college, but I would play in the off season on these courts, and I began to hear a similar thread through every story as we sat on the side with these young men of schools with no textbooks, schools with not enough chairs for their students, schools with teachers who didn't have their certificates, who didn't have college degrees. And I couldn't believe that coming from Europe where I had amazing experiences. I didn't understand what these young men were talking about. And so I became a senior in college and decided I want to visit these schools. And so I began to visit black schools in Philadelphia, and what I saw was exactly what they had described. I walked into an elementary school that absolutely rocked my world and changed the course of my life for the rest of my life. This elementary school was in North Philadelphia, a place where the police have completely abandoned, that they have weapons that are more dangerous than any weapons the police have there. So the young men run the community. This particular elementary school had gravel and old heroin needles strewn all across their playgrounds and their parking lot. When I walked into the door, I was met by the smell of feces and vomit and urine. And what I discovered, what I came to find out, is 40% of the school had no running water and electricity. 100% of the students were black, and 100% of them lived below the poverty line. Only one teacher had books in her classroom, and the reason she did was because she had 2 jobs outside of her teaching job to pay for those books. And I knew in that moment, my contribution to Dr. Martin Luther King was going to be to change education, to make sure that every child in this country had a great opportunity for education. And so I have devoted my life, actually, the information is old, I've been doing this for 19 years now. I committed a year of my college life to this school in North Philadelphia. I went 2 days a week. Then I began teaching in South Bend, Indiana, the home of Notre Dame, one of the most segregated towns in the Midwest. Then to Columbus, Ohio, where I had my second son. And then I told my husband, I can no longer live in segregation. Those of you that live out here don't even understand what segregation is, but it still exists in our country. And I said to my husband, I can no longer live in a neighborhood where my white parents can't come and visit me. And I said, where can we live in this country? My husband said Tacoma, Washington. That's where we can live. And so we moved to Tacoma about 15 years ago. And having 2 black boys, I didn't trust the public school system to them. And so I homeschooled my children. And then because I was homeschooling my children, I actually opened a school in my garage, and I began to teach all the black children in my community in Tacoma. And from that, I actually got a call from the WNBA in the middle of running that school, and they asked me to try out. So 10 years ago, I tried out for the WNBA for the Seattle Storm and the Portland Fire. I was the oldest woman. I made NBA Live for being the oldest woman with the most children at tryouts. Yeah, that's something to be known for. I didn't make the team, but I had the opportunity to represent our country and play against the Mexican Olympic team. So I spent a summer in Mexico playing semi-professional basketball, and then came back to Tacoma and devoted my life to education. And so I've been teaching, taught in Tacoma for 6 years, came to Spokane and taught at Rogers High School for 2 years, which is where I got the Teacher of the Year award. And I'm really thankful to Spokane. This is my home. Because of that award, the state superintendent asked me to come and work for her in Olympia, and that's how I ended up where I am today. But I will tell you, education is the greatest social justice issue of our day. And when we look at the disparities, the browner students are, the poorer students are, the worse they're doing in our country. Our state is one of 2 states where the achievement gap is growing in our nation. We're at crisis here. And so what can you do about this? Dr. King had a mission. Gandhi had a mission. What is your mission? How do you contribute to this day? You can sit here and listen to speeches and watch dances today in this hour. You get a day off on Monday, yahoo. But what are you going to do to contribute to the memory of Dr. King? Who are the people in your community who are downtrodden? Who are the people in this school who are invisible, who are hurting, who are without hope? And how do you reach out to them? Who are the people who are blind that need to see? Or maybe it's you. What is invisible to you right now? Where is the pain that you're not able to see? And I want to challenge you today, something that Mahatma Gandhi said. He said, be the change that you want to see. And so I want to challenge you. Think about what you would want this community to be like. And then you be that change. You extend grace to others, undeserved favor to others. Those who might hurt you, you turn around and smile at them. Turn around and shake their hand. If you see someone hurting around you, if you see homeless people on the street, speak to them as if they're human. And not as if they're a chattel like the slaves that were locked up in the bottom of the slave ships. And so today, as you finish out this day, I want you to really challenge yourself to make a difference. Don't let this day and Monday go by and just say, great, check off, we did Martin Luther King. You be the change that you want to see in this community and make this community an amazing place. Thank you so much for having me.
Show her that you love her. Love that message. Love that message. That is in the true spirit of Dr. Martin Luther King. And now, would you please stand? And gentlemen, would you please remove your hats? As Miss Camille Mitchell comes forward to sing our Negro National Anthem.